People living in the nation of Mozambique along the southern coast of Africa woke up to pretty surprising news this week. Not a ton has been happening in Mozambique in recent years, but this really rattled them a little bit. The Biden administration informed the people of Mozambique in a presidential proclamation supposedly signed by Biden himself that they are no longer allowed in the United States. Now, it's something personal. It's Omicron, the new COVID variant that has been used to justify lockdowns around the world. The problem is, and the confusion came from the fact that there is no Omicron in Mozambique. There's not a single case of it in the country. So it's possible that one of the equity hires at the White House confused Mozambique with Botswana, where the other day 2 people may possibly have died of Omicron. Either way, Mozambique and Botswana don't even share a border, so people in Mozambique were highly confused and probably a little hurt. Today, Tony Fauci, who was the person, of course, who signed off on this travel ban, was asked about this by an African reporter. You know, Fauci replied, that's a good question, an important question. And then Fauci didn't answer it or even hint at an answer. So as of right now, we still don't know why there is a White House travel ban on Mozambique. Presumably the answer is because it's in Africa. And Africa is where all of this started just a few days ago, when the head of the South African Medical Association, a physician called Angelique Coetzee, noted that she had seen patients with a new variant of the coronavirus. Within hours of her saying that, politicians in the United States and many other countries began planning elaborate and highly punitive new measures against their own populations. From her office in Pretoria, Dr. Coetzee watched all of this happen with her jaw open. She was horrified. Quote, I have been stunned at the response, Coetzee wrote today in a piece for the Daily Mail. No one here in South Africa is known to have been hospitalized with the Omicron variant, nor is anyone here believed to have fallen seriously ill with it, end quote. In other words, Omicron, whatever it is far less dangerous than pretty much everything else that's currently going on in South Africa at the moment. But it didn't matter. By this point, the Biden administration had stopped listening to Dr. Angelique Coetzee. They'd gotten what they needed from her, and they moved on. So here's Tony Fauci today announcing that the terrifying scourge of Omicron has reached our shores.
A recent case of COVID-19 among an individual in California was caused by the Omicron variant. The individual was fully vaccinated and experienced mild symptoms, which are improving at this point.
Okay, so let's just parse this just for a moment. A fully vaccinated person in California has Omicron and is doing fine. So what can we conclude rationally from this? Well, obviously, the most stringent COVID restrictions in the country are not stopping the spread. Masking, social distancing, nonstop anxiety, talking about COVID from dawn to dusk. None of it worked. And the vaccines didn't work either. The patient in California had 2 injections and still got Omicron. So maybe the lesson here is viruses are very hard to stop. Sometimes they're virtually impossible to stop because they spread with remarkable efficiency. In the case of coronaviruses, they live in animals, so they're never going away, ever, no matter what. They don't tell you that, but it's true. So given all of those facts, it's possible we would be better off working on medicines to keep those viruses from killing vulnerable people. That seems like a rational approach to the problem. And yet is the one thing the Biden administration is completely uninterested in doing. No interest whatsoever in doing that. Instead, Biden announced today that the lesson he is drawing from the harmless infection of a fully vaccinated person in the state of California is that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. They're the ones to blame for it, not the Chinese government, which likely created this virus and has definitely profited from it immensely. No. Omicron and COVID more broadly, said the president, are the direct responsibility of the 20% of the adult American population, many of whom have natural immunity, who have resisted submitting to his injections. And they must be crushed for that. Now, at this point, it's hardly worth explaining how far from legitimate science this is. It's nonsense. It's actually demented. But more than that, it is dangerous. On the basis of no demonstrated threat to public health whatsoever, the Biden administration is once again locking down the country and persecuting its perceived political opponents, otherwise known as the unvaccinated. So you have to ask yourself, when will this end? Viruses mutate constantly. That's their nature. Will every new Omicron variant mean massive new and unconstitutional powers for our political class? That's what it's meant so far. This is a cycle, and it's not a cycle that any democracy can survive. You'd think some of the media might point this out. What are the limits here? No. Instead, they're making certain you're as terrified as Joe Biden wants you to be.
A new COVID-19 variant is causing global alarm as some countries scramble to enact fresh travel restrictions in an attempt to contain the latest coronavirus threat.
The new Omicron COVID variant could already be in the United States, but many Americans may not be ready to hear it. Reaction to the latest threat.
This new threat of the Omicron variant.
On the economic threat posed by the Omicron variant.
The potential threat from Omicron.
The emerging threat of Omicron. The Omicron variant poses a new threat. The potential threat posed by this new Omicron variant.
And what Americans need to know about the evolving threat.
It's a threat, they repeat over and over. It's almost like it's a script they're reading. Meanwhile, the Biden administration says it may force everyone entering the country, even American citizens, even people who are vaccinated, to enter some kind of mandatory quarantine when they get here. In their own country, quarantine. Now, that's, of course, assuming they arrive legally. Biden voters who sneak through over the Mexican border, as always, are exempt from all rules. No vaccination, no quarantine, just endless benefits and broad smiles. Leana Wen, the former Planned Parenthood ghoul you so often see on CNN talking about health, recently explained that thanks to Omicron, and we're quoting, there should be mandatory quarantine and post-arrival testing for all international travelers, as well as additional impetus for vaccination and boosters. Quarantine, mandatory quarantine for American citizens in their own country. Additional impetus for more vaccines. What does that mean exactly? Well, we're not sure. We can guess. We do know, among other things, it means a lot more spying on you. Watch the CDC director explain the CDC is now a kind of intelligence agency. Watch.
Currently, CDC is expanding a surveillance program with Express Check to JFK, San Francisco, Newark, and Atlanta airports, 4 of the busiest international airports in the country. This program allows for increased COVID testing for specific international arrivals, increasing our capacity to identify those with COVID-19 on arrival to the United States, and enhancing our surveillance for the Omicron variant. Thanks to our updated travel policies earlier this month, we are also actively working with the airlines to collect passenger information that can be used by CDC and local public health jurisdictions to enhance contact tracing and post-arrival follow-up should a case be identified in a traveler.
Now keep in mind, the person you just heard speaking has no demonstrated record of success in anything. This is a former college professor who, since taking over the CDC, has seen more Americans die of COVID than died under the last CDC director. That looks like failure. But in Washington, it's rewarded. Because success and failure are not actually the measurements that matter in Washington. Political loyalty is, and Rochelle Walensky is a loyal Democrat. So she's being rewarded with the powers of an intelligence agency. She'll now be, quote, collecting passenger information as part of a domestic surveillance operation at major airports. There was never a vote on this. Nobody asked you whether you were for it. This is, again, the CDC director who somehow nationalized America's rental properties. She's going to be spying on you. The question really is, how much longer will this country continue to tolerate this? You've got to wonder. And what happens if we keep tolerating it? We don't need to wonder about that because we've got Australia as an example. Consider this new video. It's from an Australian newscast this morning. Watch as the anchor announces the breaking news of the day, which is the escape of 3 inmates, Australian citizens, from a COVID concentration camp. Watch.
We start with breaking news out of Darwin, where 3 people have escaped from the Howard Springs COVID quarantine facility. Talia Sava's there for us. Talia, good morning. There's a search underway right now.
Yes, that's right, Davina. Good morning to you. We've been told the trio scaled the fence in the early hours of this morning. Police receiving reports around 4:40 a.m. Now, major police checkpoints have been set up around Howard Springs for the past several hours. As you can see in these pictures, they've been conducting thorough searches in car boots, checking vehicle registrations, cars and buses alike.
So that's not a third world country, that's Australia, which until 20 minutes ago seemed very much like America, maybe slightly more exotic and charming, but not so different, really. Same culture, same language, same basis of its legal system. In case you're wondering, it doesn't seem like any of these escapees actually have COVID. There's no evidence they're infecting anybody. But it didn't matter. They're supposed to be behind bars. Now they're not. So police set up roadblocks, checkpoints, brought in the dogs. It's a democracy. It doesn't seem very healthy. It's not just Australia, by the way. In Austria, authorities have stopped people on the street and are demanding to see their COVID papers. In Canada, unvaccinated citizens have now been banned from planes or trains in their own country. Not because they've tested positive for COVID and are infecting people, but simply because they haven't taken the injection that the Prime Minister demands they take. Whether or not they have natural immunity, that's irrelevant. It's about obedience. That's Canada. This is where we're heading, and we're heading there very, very fast. As the Democratic Party comes closer to certain defeat a year from now in the midterms, all of this will intensify. That's the whole point of it. It's how they won last time, and so they're doing it again. Omicron. Not a single person is in the hospital in South Africa because of Omicron, and yet that's the pretext upon which the CDC has just assumed surveillance powers. You don't need to be a genius to connect the dots here. But there aren't a ton of geniuses running the Republican Party, apparently. They still don't seem to understand what is happening. Listen to them, and they talk like this is about a virus. But somebody needs to push back. Maybe it'll take a new party, a civil rights party, to stop our descent toward actual tyranny. But make no mistake, unless someone stops it very soon, it is coming.